it's me, Holly, and I'm going to talk to you guys about a book called All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This book is not the type of book I generally read. It's more of a historical fiction wherein I stick to young adult or fantasy books. It was a book that my book club decided to read for this month, so I'm going to talk about my thoughts and my feelings and opinions on this book. Before I get into any kind of spoilers, this book follows two main characters. One is named Mari Lore, and I believe that's how you say her name. I listened to the audiobook version, so that's what they said in the audiobook. So that's what I'm going to say. So Mari Lore, who is actually a blind girl. It also follows Werner, who is a German boy. I think he's from Germany originally. Anyways, he ends up in Germany. We follow their paths through the time from 1934 up to 1944 in World War II. So it goes into World War II and how things were in France and in Germany and what happened to them. I learned a lot in this book. It helped me gain a better perspective of what happened in World War II and what could have happened. Even though this isn't like a historical textbook, it definitely gives you another perspective in that time frame. I enjoyed the writing very, very much, but the ending is what really made it difficult for me to love this book, and it was definitely slow at parts, and I know a lot of people loved this book, so I might get a lot of backlash for this. I'm not going to go more into it unless you have read the book. I'm now going to go into spoilers, so if you have not read this book, go read it, come back, and see how you feel about this, and finish this review. Bye, non-spoily people! Okay, before I get any further in this book, like my general thoughts and feelings about this book is I learned a lot. It was very educational. I enjoyed reading parts of it, but it dragged definitely. And like the middle piece of that book, it was so long. And I should say that I did this audio as an audiobook and I read it. That got super confusing. I had a hard time with the audiobook really making sure I knew who the characters were. Definitely have the real book in front of you so that you can go back and forth and make those connections. And once I did, I was like really making some great connections with it. Like this goes back and forth in time from 1944 to whatever time we're at. And I actually really enjoyed that layout of the book. That was necessary for me because the 1944 part of the book is what was so climactic and intense, and I needed to know what was going to go on. So I knew if I just kept going, I knew I would get to that point, and I kept being like, well, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? I loved his layout of the book in that way. I loved the short chapters. I loved his writing. I was bored at times. It just dragged. So the very beginning, the prologue, I was so lost. Wait, America bombed France? Wait, is France bad or is France good? Are we considered the bad guys then? But I thought we were the good guys in the war. Then it goes, it's like the girl, and it talks about Mari Lore, who I was expecting. And then it talks about the boy, and in my mind I'm like, oh, this is going to be a love story. I was so happy. I'm like, yay, I can read this book. It's a love story. The very first chapter in chapter 1, I loved. I loved the story behind the Sea of Flames. I loved the folklore behind it, the fantasy element behind it, and the mystery about it. And then there's that curse with it that that one person can live forever, but then everyone else around them is going to die and have misfortune. Well, that idea and that curse is really what drove the story forward, because that's when Major Von Rumpel comes into play. That's one of my issues that I had with the book, was Major Von Rumpel. I couldn't figure out his true motive. Obviously he wanted the Sea of Flames. Did he want the Sea of Flames because it was like an order from Hitler's army? Or did he want the Sea of Flames because he believed it to have healing powers? This is where I get stuck, because he learned about the Sea of Flames and he was looking up the history about it before he found out that he was sick. He finds out he's sick, and you start to understand that he is kind of interested in the fact that maybe it could heal him and maybe he could live. Does he really truly believe that? You hear the story and you're like, oh, it's like Santa Claus. It's like a little story. It's not real. I wouldn't think it would be real. I would really be doubtful of this. And this is like an older man. Maybe the fact that he's sick is making him crazy enough to really go after this. He was always interested in the Sea of Flames. Like, that was his goal. And I just wasn't really sold on his motive to go after that. Was it really worth his life in the end to go after it? The beginning of the book was very interesting, and I loved learning about Werner and hearing his backstory of learning about the radio. And that's a huge piece of this book, is that the radio really opened communication to people. The whole point that radio and what he listened to was Marie-Laure's grandfather of Etienne playing, and then later he finds that out when he's in Saint-Malo, was so cool. I really loved that connection. I thought that was really poetic to have that kind of circling of his life really coming to that point, and it made him finally say, no, I'm going to stand up for what I believe in. It was interesting to hear his perspective, because he was a Nazi, but he kind of saw what was wrong, but he didn't do anything to stop it, because they're kind of forced into this position. Anyways, the beginning I loved. I really enjoyed the first piece, and then he brings us back, he chapter 2, I guess, would be where we are stepped back into 1944, and we learn a little bit more about what's happening in 1944. But then it goes back in time again. Oh, I guess this book is gonna give us more information. And I was thinking originally oh, I'm just gonna get a little piece of who they were in the background, and then we're gonna kind of fast forward. No, 400 pages more of background, more and more background. I enjoyed pieces of it, but really it was the parts where 1944, that day in Saint-Malo when the bombings came off, was when I was super intrigued. What was fun was to kind of piece what was happening. I was wondering, well, what's gonna happen to Etienne, and what's gonna happen to Madame Menek, because she's all alone in that house. So at some point she's gonna be alone, because she had her father, she had Madame Menek, she had Etienne, so what's gonna happen to them? You wonder, how did Werner get to that position, because he was in School Forta, but then he was nominated or made an older age to be put onto a different team and had to go search for people who were using the radio. I still have some questions though about this book. Why did Marie-Laure's father, why was he sent that note to go to the museum? In my mind, when I originally read that, I thought it was because Major von Rumpel pretty much forced the museum to give him the Sea of Flames. So they were like, Etienne, you need to come to the museum because he's going to possibly hurt our families. But then von Rumpel leaves and doesn't know anything about Marie-Laure's father. But then during that process, Marie-Laure's father is kidnapped because Claude set him to be arrested because he saw him making designs and sketches and measurements of the city and thought that was bad when it was just for a model. Whoa, that was an intense things that happened, and I was just not sure and not clear about what happened until later, when I realized that Major von Rumpel didn't even know Marie-Laure's father existed, because he didn't know who had the Sea of Flames, who had the real Sea of Flames. He knew it was a fake in the museum. I don't know who sent him that note. Was it really the museum that did it? And I'm so surprised. Originally I thought he would have taken the Sea of Flames with him, but he didn't. And I didn't make that connection that he put it in Marie-Laure's model house forever until he sent that letter saying it's in Etienne's house, it's in the house. I loved when we were finally at the point with Werner and Marie-Laure in Saint-Malo. That was super exciting. I was so excited when he saw her for the first time, and he was like, oh, she's beautiful. Oh my goodness, she's gonna know I stared at her. Oh wait, she's blind. And then he just follows her, like creeper. It made me excited. I was like, oh good, they're about to meet. He hears her when he's under the rubble and just wants to go and save her. And that's like the first thing he does when he's finally free. That day where they were together, I was so happy. Yes, this is gonna work out. I love this. Then it just went terrible, and he didn't go with her. He was captured, and then of course lands on a landmine and blows up and dies. That's when I put the book away. I was like, I'm done. I don't want to read this anymore. Like, no. And of course I'm thinking, maybe he didn't really die. Goes to his sister, who I think he pronounced her name as Yoda, and she said that she learned of his death. It's just so sad. No. I can guess what people would say about this is, well, not like real life doesn't end in happy endings. And this was real life. This was a World War II historical fiction, but it was fiction. They need to end up together. I went into it thinking it was a love story and it was a day love story. I went through all of that for one day together. Then they go back to, you know, future, way ahead of 1944, when Volkheimer goes to Yoda's house and she finds out that there's a duffel bag with Werner's things in it. I was crying. I could empathize with her really well in that, even though I've never been in this position, but just how the writing went, you really understood her position. She finally found some piece of her brother that she hadn't heard from in years. Then she goes and finds Marie-Laure, which I loved. I loved that Marie-Laure found out that he did pass away and that he kept her house. That was so, like, I really am thinking about that a little bit more. Like, why did he keep the house and how did that happen? Did she throw the house with the gem and then he went back in, grabbed the house, took the gem out, and then there was a key in it? Is that the key to the grotto? I think it's a grotto, that's what I'm calling it. It was kind of just more of a symbolism that, you know, she was still with him and he was really influenced by her and he was touched by her and in love with her. They were meant to be. Like, there was so much where I was like, oh, it's just fate that they need to be together. And like, she had a daughter, but she didn't stay with the guy. Then it just ends with her and her grandson. No, I don't like that ending. The ending was so sad. It wasn't like satisfying at the ending. I wanted that satisfying ending, but definitely such an educational book, because after that book, I went onto Wikipedia and tried to learn everything I could about Saint-Malo and about the bombings, about World War II a little bit more, because I wanted to understand what was going on. I had some moments where I was really intrigued by this. The last part was so amazing. The middle part, The beginning I loved. Those are my thoughts and my feelings about All the Light We Cannot See. Please comment below and tell me what you thought of this book. Am I crazy to feel this way about this book? I hope you feel maybe the same way. I will talk to you guys later. Bye!